Hi guys, and welcome to TechFurb. Today we are taking a look at the AMD A8 6600K.
Absolutely. I know it's going to...
So, why on earth would we take a look at something that's this old? For reference, this is from around the 2012 era, so we're looking at about 8-year-old CPU, and when it released, it was, well, for all intensive purposes, a budget CPU. I actually purchased a A8 5600K, so the step down from this particular model. And when I used it back in 2012, it definitely was a budget CPU, but it had a place in the market. It had what was called a integrated Radeon GPU in the CPU itself, so it meant that you would get better than typical integrated graphics for the time. I was actually able to run things like Fallout New Vegas and stuff like that. So it was AAA titles that were a couple of years older, but I was able to run those titles on that particular APU. The reason why I had it back then was I was in university, didn't have a lot of cash. And, well, I needed to muck around with VMs and sort of learn a few sort of things that I use now in my actual professional career in IT. But moving forward 8 years' time, it was a budget CPU back then, and certainly now the performance I don't think would have aged very well. But I haven't investigated this CPU in some time, so let's have a look at how this guy performs in 2020. Now, to quantify the performance, I did do some benchmarks, so there's a couple of gaming benchmarks and Cinebench run a couple of different things. It is also worth noting that the general performance of the CPU as well, because this is not a gaming CPU. It's far beyond those sort of era of functions. It's you shouldn't be buying this for gaming. I can tell you that without showing you benchmark charts. But how it performs in general use when paired with a 480 gig SSD is quite well. It performed about how I'd expect an i5 from the same era to perform, and I didn't really have any massive issues. It sort of ran okay. Where it ran into troubles is trying to download games on Steam on a gigabit internet connection. It topped out at about 300 meg per second in Steam. It wasn't the internet connection that was the bottleneck, it was just this particular CPU can't decompress the files fast enough to make the most of the internet connection. So there is that. But overall, it was okay. So for using it as a general purpose CPU in 2020, wasn't bad. Let's have a look at some gaming charts and quantify how this performs against hardware from around that same era. Okie dokie. So, first game we did was F1 2019, and the CPU, well, it ran the game. So, tick that box. Obviously, it didn't run the game very well. We are comparing it against an i7 2600 because I haven't gone back and re-reviewed an older i5 or i3. But we're not trying to see, how good is this CPU. It's more just, can it run the game? And yes, it can. So it can run it. It doesn't run it overly well. It runs it okay. But a racing game, you really need the FPS to be 60 plus to sort of, I guess, make the most of it. You can't really have a stuttery experience with it, which this kind of did have. So yeah, it's okay. Next we had GTA 5, and again, it was just an okay gaming experience. It had its momentary stutters, but it ran the game. We're looking at 33 on average, but it kind of did okay. And again, it's getting absolutely whitewashed with the high-end CPU it's being compared against from that era. Next was Apex Legends, and this was the first time we actually saw the CPU show a good fight. And that is because Apex Legends is really well optimized, so it doesn't have a lot of scaling for CPU performance. So as you can see, the 5600K is performing around the same performance as like all the other CPUs, and that's purely because of the bottleneck in the graphics card. So the RX 480 is actually the bottleneck, which is good to see, but I would say that is more down to optimization of Apex Legends than anything else. So it's good to see it perform well in that game. Now Battlefield 5, we're getting into more modern AAA titles. Battlefield 5 is notoriously hard to run. It doesn't like older hardware. You need sort of modern graphics cards and CPUs to really run it properly. But the 6600K it ran okay, 39 FPS. It's not great, but it's running the game. It did have its momentary stutters, but it wasn't overly bad, and it was a playable experience. Okay, now we move into the one Ubisoft title that I did benchmark, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. The reason why I went with just the one Ubisoft title is if you can pass Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you can pretty much run any of them. And I have to say, this is the first time where it didn't do so well. It averaged 26 frames per second, but the data kind of lies a little bit. The reality is when you're running that game, it's getting the stutters and the hitches, so it's not running smoothly, and it's not a great gaming experience. So Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I would say this is a fail, but you know what, it's an 8-year-old budget CPU, so we didn't expect much. Okay, The Outer Worlds. This is a title that is very well optimized. You don't see a lot of scaling with CPU performance. And again, 5600K, ran it just fine. It had like a momentary stutter and hitch, but it ran the game really well, and I would be quite pleased with this performance, regardless of what CPU it was. So I was pretty happy with how it performed in that title. And we can see, in titles where the CPU doesn't matter as much, it does okay. Okay, now we move to Cinebench. This was the only sort of synthetic benchmark I ran, and we'll look at both single core and multi-core. First up is multi-core. Now, you will notice that it scored a 593 points in Cinebench R20. I must clarify that's R20, not R15. R20, anything below sort of 700, 800 is not a great result. And we can see that this CPU, even compared to, the 2600, it's getting absolutely creamed, more than double the performance it's very bad showing for the 6600K in this instance. Then if we look at single core, the performance is a lot closer in scaling, which was a surprise for me. So it scored 198 points. Now, for reference, if you had paid attention to the multi-core performance, it's only 75% core scaling. So what I mean by that is, if you take the single core score and multiply it by the amount of cores, which is 4, in theory you should have a result that's around 790, and the actual multi-core result was, what was it? It was 598. So it was actually 75% of the maximum theoretical performance that it should have. Now, you're never going to get perfect CPU scaling, but Cinebench scales well. So what we should be seeing is something that's more of a 90% scaling per core, and that actually highlights the Achilles heel of the architecture that it's based on. So it's based on, I believe it was Piledriver, which is just sort of a rehash of the notorious Bulldozer architecture. And the problem was the design. So it had, I forget the specific term, but it had, instead of having a floating point and a integer or something, there's two specific parts to a processor that you need to sort of make it a core. It only had one of those. So, and it did them in modules. So you'd have a module of 2 integers, let's say, and then one of a floating point. So it's 4 cores, but 2 cores, or in this case 4 cores when you have 2 modules. But the reality was not exactly true. So, yeah, very interesting to see the lack of multi-core scaling in that instance. But let's talk about the let's wrap it all up into a ball. How did this CPU perform overall? Well, if we're being quite honest with ourselves, it wasn't that bad. The CPU, it's a bit dated, it's a bit old, but you know what? It's doing okay. So let's sort of break this down into 2 different categories. Let's say you currently own this CPU and you're looking to upgrade to something new. If you own this and it's still doing what you need it to do, I would say to you, keep using it. The reason why is you will need to upgrade it soon, but the thing is, the longer you can stretch it out, the better it'll be, because at the moment there's a big battle going on between Intel and AMD. I'll say AMD will probably come out with a 4000 series, and I reckon they'll probably have Intel by the throat for at least another year. So if you're waiting probably another 6 months, you'll be able to pick up a really nice Ryzen 4000 CPU, and well, that'll be a big jump in performance. But that's a sort of something to consider in the future. So if you've got that CPU now, hang on to it for a little bit longer, save it some money, and be prepared to upgrade it soon. That is my sort of advice. However, for everyone else, I can't be much blunter. do not buy this CPU. It has not aged well. It's good enough for general computing, but the problem is the pricing that this comes in at. I don't know why, but AMD CPUs seem to come with this AMD tax for used CPUs. So if you try and pick this up used on the market, you'll be paying like 20 or 30 bucks for the CPU, and then probably about the same for a motherboard, maybe a bit more. The problem is, you can pick up a second gen Core i5 and a motherboard for about the same price or less. And I can tell you, a second gen Core i5 will mop the floor with that CPU. So yeah, don't buy this CPU. If you're selling it, be realistic. It's worth basically nothing now. So it's kind of rough to say, but yeah, that CPU is about ready to be put out to pastures if you're looking for a new system. But anyway, that's all I have for this video. Not a full long-term sort of review like normal, because I didn't really feel like the CPU deserved the time and effort for, you know, a 13 game benchmark and stuff like that. Let me know in the comments if you would like more content on this CPU. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask them below. I would recommend, though, going on the Discord server I have, link in the video description. The reason why is after the video's been up for a few weeks, I sort of stopped moderating the comments. And if you need to ask a question, well, I'm almost always checking Discord, so I'll be able to answer it probably a bit more in detail, and it's just better experience. Having said that, like the video if you liked it, dislike if you disliked it, comments down below, as I said before, and if you are enjoying the content, you've watched a couple of my videos, why not subscribe? Because I do regularly release content, usually every 1 to 3 weeks, and well, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.